Hello and welcome to everyone. Thank you very much for your interest in this very important topic. My name is Dr. Luca Gambirasio. I am an eco-musicologist, ethnomusicologist, but also composer, performer, guitarist, and sound artist. You can find some of my artistic work in this YouTube channel and my research output on my ResearchGate profile that is linked in the description below. In this lecture, I will explain what is the role of music and sound in responding to the cultural component of the current environmental crisis that we are all living in. I define this very phenomena as sound-mediated environmentalisms. I will explain this term later on in the lecture. The theory that constitutes the core of this lecture, which is the definition of sound-mediated environmentalisms as a response to the environmental crisis, has been developed over a few years of research that has been made possible by the Department of Music at University College Cork in the Republic of Ireland. There's also been an innumerable amount of very kind individuals that were involved in this research. There is no space here to thank them all, but I have my most profound gratitude for all their help, suggestions, feedbacks, ideas, conversations, and chats over a coffee and so on. I will start by providing a definition of the academic field in which this work is situated, and I will go on by providing a series of key concepts and terms that are, in my advice, essential to better understand the concept of sound-mediated environmentalisms. I will also include a series of practical examples derived from my years of research fieldwork in Italy. These examples include the work of local artists, performers, and organizations, and I will include a link to their main online platform in the description below to be sure that I get proper recognition for their kindness, their great work, and all the help that they've been giving me to develop these ideas surrounding the concept of sound-mediated environmentalisms. Last but not least, what you see on the screen here is my email address. You are very welcome to reach out to connect, ask questions, clarifications, or just chat about sound, music, and nature. And if you have anything to say really that you think it's related to the content of this talk, please reach out. Your ideas are most welcome. Thank you very much again. Still part of the introduction, I would like to briefly define what I mean by environmental crisis. I mean all those environmental issues that are affecting everyone and everything on the planet in this current time and age. That includes climate change, greenhouse effect, deforestation, pollution, habitat degradation, wildlife displacement, loss of biodiversity, and several more. It's an issue that affects, again, everything and everyone on the planet, and it has a multitude of different effects on different beings and habitat. For example, it impacts wildlife negatively. I already mentioned the biodiversity loss and so on. Some issues related with environmental crisis increase soil erosion and affect water quality. And there are several issues that impact human beings directly. The environmental crisis has been proven to affect humans' mental health negatively. And one of the consequences of the environmental crisis is that humans are being displaced, and there have been patterns of forced migration as a consequence of the environmental crisis. The first topic that I'm going to explore today is the academic context in which this theory is situated, which is the field of ecomusicology and its subfield eco-ethnomusicology. Now, to clarify my position, I kind of disagree with the need of identifying, categorizing, and dividing music research into multiple fields, subfields, and disciplines, as I believe that it may increase somehow division and disciplinary misunderstandings, as eventually we all are aiming at the same objective. We are trying to to get more clarity on the roles of music and sound and their roles within the life of people, within society and culture and the environment as well. Moreover, as I will argue later, we are part of nature and so are music and all the fields of research on music. Therefore, increasing the number of conceptual divides between objects means also to increase our misunderstandings about reality, but this is something I will explore more in detail later on today. On the other hand, we also deal with institutions, academic jobs, journals, and grants. Therefore, conceptual definitions are somehow necessary, and field definitions also provide researchers with disciplinary homes in which they can meet the work of other similarly oriented people. This work is situated within ecomusicology and eco-ethnomusicology. So very briefly, ecomusicology can be defined as the ecocentric study of the three-way relationship between music, nature, and culture, which are three very complex terms. Ecomusicology is particularly important, as I said earlier, in the context of the environmental crisis in which we are currently living, because this relationship between culture and nature is particularly disrupted in this time and age. Now, ecomusicology is formed by this triad of relationship between nature, culture, and music. It's interesting to note that these three terms are really hard to define. What is music? Some composers define it as organized sound. It's important to denote that what is music is very much informed by our cultural understandings of musical phenomena. In our culture, music, the English word music, means something very obvious to us, but in other cultures, and most importantly, in other languages, concepts and ideas about music differ very much. So all these concepts that we're taking into consideration today are not fixed, but are definitions that our culture somehow attributed to phenomena that exist within the ecosystem of this planet, and music is one of them. In other culture, for instance, music means necessarily dance as well, not only sounds that are produced by instruments. In some languages, there are different words for vocal music or instrumental music, or classical music and traditional folk music have different ideas and concepts around them. So it's important to think about these words that we commonly use every day a bit more in depth. Nature and culture are similarly complex. I won't go in depth with either of them. I leave the definition of culture to cultural anthropologists, perhaps. For what concerns nature, we often define nature as something that is external to human beings, or to some essential characteristics proper to an individual or a species or a social group and so on. I will say that both definitions are kind of mistaken, because for the former direction, the one that defines nature as everything that is kind of external to human beings, excludes human beings from the ecosystems and from the natural processes that happen on the planet. And this is one of the very reasons why we have an environmental crisis, because we think that nature is something external to us, as something, it's a realm in which we do not belong. Which is, of course, incorrect, because we breathe the same oxygen of all other animals. We have the same need of drinking water and eating food. We have the same need of sheltering from the weather that affects all other living beings in the environment. And we live in a sort of interdependent relationship with all these other elements, non-human animals, plants, fungi, moss, lichens, and water bodies, creatures dwelling underwater, and plants and trees, and so on. So we are part of the same ecosystem, same as all these other living and non-living creatures. Therefore, nature comprehends everything on the planet. To go back to ecomusicology, it's a field of study, and it's defined as the ecocentric study of this three-way relationship between music, culture, and nature. And it's often referred as a plural, ecomusicologies, because there is no fixed methodology in ecomusicology, but rather ecomusicology includes multiple possible directions of scholarly inquiry. One of these directions is the one that I chose to employ for this work, which is eco-ethnomusicology. I come from an ethnomusicological background. So eco-ethnomusicology is to apply ethnomusicology focus on fieldwork and participant observation for ecocentric research. So eco-ethnomusicology is an ecocentric approach to ethnomusicology that expands ethnomusicology classical focus of studying people making music. Eco-ethnomusicology expands this focus to include beings that are more than human and forms of sounds communication that are more than music. So it could be defined as a study of living beings making and engaging with all types of sounds. In defining ecomusicology and eco-ethnomusicology, I have used multiple times the adjective ecocentric. Ecomusicology is the ecocentric study of music, nature, and culture. Eco-ethnomusicology is an ecocentric approach to ethnomusicology, and so on. So ecocentrism is intended as a worldview that reflects this idea of including all living beings and non-living beings within the scope of one's inquiries. Ecocentrism is opposite to anthropocentrism. This is very visual in the slide on the screen now. Anthropocentrism is also a worldview, but contrarily to ecocentrism, anthropocentrism sees humans and their activities as inherently more important than the rest of the planet. You see humans, and more specifically a male, at the top of the pyramid. Whereas all the other creatures and a human female are down below him. Anthropocentrism is the cause of several societal and cultural disasters that we have been living through as a society on the planet, because it enables harmful cultural phenomena such as patriarchate and extractivism, capitalism, neoliberalism, and many others, speciesism, and many others. So the core value of anthropocentric worldview is that humans, grounded in their selfishness, they feel like they have right to extract natural resources, pollute environments, raise and slaughter non-human animals in order to consume their bodies. Humans can destroy habitats and ecosystems just to satisfy their needs. According to this view, humans are detached from the rest of the environment, which is the key concept that I introduced earlier in the definition of nature. And according to anthropocentrism, humans believe that their harmful activities are unlikely to harm them back in return, because again, we believe that nature is something else outside of us. And this reflects on a multitude of daily activities, really, because even something so harmless such as mowing the lawn in front of your house, it is an ecological disaster, and it's something that is reflected on the health of the people living in the house. Where I'm from in Italy, for instance, there is a huge mosquito problem in the summer, during the summer months. And as people and local institutions mow their lawns and cut the grass in public spaces and so on, there are less and less and less predatory species that predate on mosquitoes, larvae and adults. Therefore, there is a multitude of mosquitoes going around there. And same for the use of pesticides, since we want to extract as much resources as we can from the soil. We use pesticides and herbicides that kill other plant and animal species that will predate on mosquitoes, for instance, and other harmful species, with the conclusion that there are more and more mosquitoes that attack humans, spreading disease and just being annoying, really. So everything is interconnected, everything is related, and the views of anthropocentrism that we are disconnected from the rest of the world, obviously it's incorrect and mistaken. So in opposition to anthropocentrism, ecocentrism is a worldview that considers, correctly so, human beings as just one of the animal species of the planet. And human beings are not more important of any of the other species. Humans and their actions are also part of the ecosystems. And not only the actions, but also the thoughts and the ideas, everything is part of nature. Therefore, humans' impact has consequences of the environment, and human actions have ultimately an impact on themselves. And we know this is true, we acknowledge that this is true. And an ecocentric approach to anything, an ecocentric worldview, means to acknowledge this system of interconnection of humans with other non-humans beings, plants, the soil, microorganisms, and the air, the water bodies, and so on. And an ecocentric approach to the music and to the study of music then means to consider music as part of nature, as part of the ecosystem, as part of the environment, and to study music, acknowledging that music is part of nature and ecosystem and so on. And it also means to acknowledge that both making music and the study of music affect the environment and therefore affect all the living beings dwelling in the environment. Ecomusicology and eco-ethnomusicology aims to study music for the sake of the environment, because we acknowledge that ultimately benefiting the environment, benefiting the ecosystem, ultimately this will benefit all the creature dwelling in the ecosystem and us as well. I will go back to this very key point at the end of this talk. This is time for a quick side note. I've been mentioning several times the concept of environment. So etymologically speaking, the word environment derives from a French word, environ, which means everything that surrounds a subject. So environment is a highly relative term. It means literally the world that surrounds any subject. So if I'm talking about my environment, is everything that surrounds me, the place where I'm living in, including, I don't know, my house, the bookshelf that I have in front of me in this moment, but also the living beings that surrounds me, the trees in my garden, my cats, people living in the neighborhood, in the town, and so on. So when we speak about environment, we often misuse this subject as a synonym for nature, and we always think about the natural environment. That's incorrect. And for the very purpose of this talk, environment means something in relation to something else. So a subject that experiences a space surrounding it. In a similar way, when I speak about environmental sounds, that means sounds that are perceived by a specific subject. So again, if I make an example of myself now, my environmental sounds is all the sounds that I'm hearing in this moment, including the cooling fan of my laptop, the birds singing outside of my window, people listening to some music in the house nearby, and so forth. So environment is a space surrounding a subject. Environmental sounds, all the sounds that can be heard by any subject. So we're going now towards the core part of this lecture, which is the definition of sound-mediated environmentalisms. Let's start by defining what is environmentalism. Environmentalism is a social, political, and ethical movement that seeks to protect particular habitats, protect wildlife, seeks to protest against habitat degradation and resource exploitations, and also advocate for more ecocentric worldviews and lifestyles. And sound-mediated environmentalism is everything that kind of aims to these goals, to the same goals of environmentalism, but through sonic means, basically. Specifically, we're talking about all social, political, and ethical acts that through sound engage with the cultural dimensions of the environmental crisis. So, sound and music-based events that try to promote more ecocentric worldviews and lifestyles, whilst criticizing and advocating against anthropocentric mindsets, worldviews, and lifestyles. I organized these sound-mediated environmentalisms into clusters according to a series of common features and macro characteristics. So far, I found about 4 clusters, which includes sound walks, ecotourism, music and sound used to raise environmental awareness, and music and sound used to kind of foster non-dualistic approaches to nature. This list is by all means open-ended, in the sense that hopefully many other clusters and examples and forms of sound-mediated environmentalisms will be identified in the future. Also, these categories, these clusters are 100% porous and they overlap with each other, and you'll see as I introduce a couple of examples later on. Every example belongs to a specific cluster, but also shares some characteristics with other clusters. So, for instance, something belonging to music used for ecotourism purposes, an example belonging to this category might also be used to raise environmental awareness, or might also include characteristics from the soundworks cluster, and so on. The first cluster of examples of sound-mediated environmentalisms that I'm going to introduce today regards soundwalking. Soundwalking, namely, means every instance of walking with the main purpose to listen to the environment. This is the classical definition shared among sound artists. There is quite a lot of research about sound walking in sound studies and among sound artists and sound designers, in architecture as well, which I really, really recommend. It's a fascinating world to get into. So here specifically, I consider soundwalking as a mean towards environmentalism. So, as I said earlier, as a form of sound-mediated environmentalisms. So, we could specifically talk about environmentalist soundwalking. So, not any type of soundwalking, but soundwalking made with some environmentalist goal in mind. When soundwalking intention is key, is not any walk, is not any hike, any trekking on any trail. It's walking with a purpose, and the purpose is to listen intentionally to environmental sounds, which is, as I explained earlier, environmental sounds is any sound that I can perceive in a given environment. So given a subject who is soundwalking, this subject will inevitably perceive several sounds, and these sounds in classical soundscape ecology literature include sound emitted by geological, non-biotic features such as the wind and the soil and the weather and so on, or sounds emitted by other form of life such as bird songs or the noise of any other living creature, really, and all those sounds that are emitted by other humans, or sounds that are consequences of human actions, such as traffic noise, industrial noise, and so on. So in our case of environmentalist soundwalking, I found three main purposes for soundwalking with an environmentalist purpose, which are displayed along a continuum that goes from the poetic to the practical. Now, this idea of a continuum from poetic to the practical is borrowed by Aaron Allen and his idea of different ecomusicologies that are similarly displayed on a similar continuum that goes from poetic to practical. This is to show that there are multiple possibilities. Even though I'm displaying here three specific cases of environmentalist soundwalking, there may be more that I have not found yet, and these can be displayed within the continuum. This continuum is merely an organizational tool. On the poetic end of the continuum, we have soundwalking that is employed to foster empathy and connection with a specific place. Towards the middle of the continuum, we have soundwalking aimed at environmental education projects, so education about specific characteristics of a place, such as the wildlife, the species dwelling in a particular area, the biodiversity of a specific area, and so on. And towards the practical end of the continuum, we have sound walking aimed at wildlife conservation. And this is a type of sound walking that is employed by conservation organization on a regular basis, just to monitor, for instance, the species dwelling in a specific area. Now, just to provide a brief example of environmentalist sound walk, in the picture you can see a boarded footwalk in a protected area in central Italy, which is where I conducted most of my research fieldwork so far. This area is managed by the birds conservation organization LIPU. They use this area to bring people around the protected area to listen to bird songs and engage with the biodiversity of the area and make them learn about the biodiversity, biological features of the area, and the lake, which is an industrial basin that, interestingly enough, several bird species chose as nesting place for the breeding season, because birds obviously don't care if an area is artificial or natural, of course, because that division only exists in our minds, really. So this organization conducts all sort of environmentalist sound walk to foster a sense of empathy in the visitor for the other living beings dwelling in a specific space. They also conduct educational sound walks with groups of adults and school children and so on, to make them learn about various features of the area and its biodiversity. And they also use the same trail to do some sort of wildlife monitoring sound walks. Namely, they walk around listening to all the bird species that every season choose this area to nest and to reproduce, and so on. Another very brief example of environmentalist sound walking. This time we were talking about an area situated in the mountains between Tuscany and Emilia-Romagna, which is basically the Apennines, the mountains that occur in the middle of the country in Italy. You may notice that I haven't shown pictures of human beings yet. That's because sound walking again requires a certain extent of intention and a sort of meditative approach. So when participating to sound walking, you want to focus on listening and experiencing a certain area rather than pulling out the phone or a camera and taking pictures. In this area, in the mountains, in the Apennines, there are various cultural organizations that organizes various types of experiences. They employ walking, any type of walking, as a nature bonding activity. One organization in specificity, cooperative Inquiete, they organize walks in the forest to reach key locations where local artists perform music. So we have a sound walk, but it's slightly different from the previous case of sound walking, because group of participants are made walk through the forest to reach a place where they have to intentionally listening to the soundscape that includes music performed by human actors. But the same organization, interestingly enough, also organizes sensory walks to appreciate local biodiversity. That includes not only birds, but also listening to the bellowing of the deers in the mating season, the howling of the wolves. And they do it for multiplicity of purposes. Whilst on one hand they try to develop this sense of empathy for the place and for the other living creatures living in there, they also contribute to create a body of epistemic knowledge about the non-human animals that live in the forests in the area. These signs that I pictured in this slide, it's quite evocative. It says respect these places of silence and pray, and whilst that doesn't have to do with this organization that organize sound walks in the area, and it's related to a monastery that exists there in the mountains. The fact that the sound walks are often conducted around this area, in which silence is encouraged by other means as well, it highlights the need for a meditative approach to nature and to protected areas, an approach in which participants are taken into a specific area and they're asked to be silent, focused, undistracted, away from usual sources of distractions, which are things like phones, for instance, notifications, and chats with other humans. So sound walking is also a sort of form of meditation aimed at bringing our attention to the world that surrounds us, to the environment that surrounds us. The second cluster of examples of sound-mediated environmentalisms that I'm going to introduce today is music and sound employed as part of ecotourist activities. Briefly, ecotourism is a type of tourist activity that delivers experiences to the visitors that are aimed at environmental education, sustainable living and well-being of local communities, and ultimately activities that supports environmental protection and wildlife conservation. Ecotourism in the literature includes a wide range of activities, and in any case it also includes music. A musical ecotourist event is any performance, musical performance or sound-based performance that has an intentionally reduced environmental impact. We're talking, for instance, about events with a limited number of participants, musical performances that are either acoustic or unplugged, events in which the levels of noise and light pollutions are strictly monitored and limited, and also events in which the venue of the performance is often reached by foot. And they somehow, in this sense, they somehow overlap with the previous cluster of case studies. As I said earlier, the clusters overlap to each other. So we can have a sound walk that is also part of an ecotourist event and vice versa. These ecotourist activities are quite often set within the boundaries of protected natural areas, and therefore they're aimed to raise funds for conservation, protection of that areas and its wildlife. To bring some very basic examples, these organizations obviously have to raise funds for their conservation activities, even just for the maintenance of the area. Imagine an organization like the one that I showed earlier. They have to repair their wooden boardwalk, so they need money for that. They organize a concert, and those funds go to the maintenance of the trail and so on. But also they need money for to pay the stipends to the people involved with the conservation activities. To need money to advertise properly their activities online and so on. And so these sort of performances are a mean to that end to raise funds for their non-profit activities, basically. Ecotourist activities, musical ecotourist activities, aim to engage and educate the visitors through embodied sensory experiences rather than formal educational sessions. Whilst sometimes experiences in protected natural areas aim to teach explicitly to the visitors about the biodiversity features of the area, for instance, naming all the species of plants and birds and trees and other animals and so on that live in a specific area. A musical and sound-based ecotourist activity aim to bring people in a certain area, to attract people in a certain area, make them walk, sit, and listen in such a place and engage with the organization and their goals, but never explicitly, always implicitly, through an embodied experience of appreciation of the place. The first example of this cluster, it's a quite striking one. We're talking about an organization that organizes concerts on the Apuan Alps mountain range, which is a mountain range situated in the north of Tuscany, close to the city of Carrara. This is the place where a lot of the white marble of the world came from. Think of Michelangelo's David, for instance, but also several buildings in Rome. And outside of Italy, the Marble Arch and the Victoria Memorial in London, the monument in front of Glasgow City Chambers, and the Oslo Opera House, the Peace Monument in Washington, D.C., and several other public and private buildings all over the world, in the US, India, the Arab Emirates, and so on. This organization organizes several concerts around the mountains and around the sites of excavations, around the quarries where the marble is extracted. Quite often these concerts are reachable only by foot, and sometimes only after several hours of trekking. These experiences, so the trekking plus the musical performances, are aimed to make visitors learn about the mountains, including all the issues related to the extraction history in the mountains, and which is quite problematic, as you can imagine. The extraction of the marble is an environmental disaster. Just look at the scale of the quarries. Here in the picture, you see the people gathered in the quarry. They're listening to a musical performance in this occasion, right? So the mountains are butchered. If you travel in the area by train, you see in the distance the mountains. They look white, but not because of the snow, but because they are cut open. So the mountains are butchered, the local wildlife species are displaced, and the powder resulting from the cutting of the blocks pollutes the air and the local water bodies, damaging all form of life, humans and non-humans included. This organization, through organizing concerts in the quarries and the mountains, they aim to show the visitors the current state of the mountains. They want to show the visitors the quarries and the damages caused by the quarries and the marble extractions. They want the visitors to learn implicitly rather than explicitly about the consequences of extraction. The next example is about me as a performer. It regards a short series of performances that I organized for another birds conservation organization, still in Tuscany. It's a massive wetland area that, again, is chosen as a nesting site and breeding site by several bird species. As a performance that I co-designed with a local ornithologist, namely they suggested some specific key species that are kind of representative of the area. I found the songs and the calls of these bird species and a frame and improvisatory performances around the voices of these birds, basically. But this was just an excuse, a way to bridge the attention of the visitors to the place. So music is not the focal point when we're talking about sound-mediated environmentalisms. Music is rather a sort of a pretext, a way to make people engage with other themes and issues. In this case, the performance was part of a series of other performances scattered along a trail in the area, and part of an event made to attract visitors and make them experience the protected area in a different way, through sensory and emotional exploration of the space rather than intellectual engagement with the key issues and features of the area. In this specific instance, I also interviewed the audience members, and interestingly enough, several audience members had never been in this space before. They knew about the organization, alright, but they never engaged with their activities before. They came to this place just because of the music, just because looking for events online, they found musical performance near this lake. They came, they listened to the performance, and after the performance, they expressed the wish to engage with the conservation organization activities, maybe subscribe to their newsletter or become a member, or buy a t-shirt, or ask other sort of information about the organization activities or the features of the area, and so on. It is worth to mention that ecotourism doesn't have to be necessarily in person, but it can also be virtual, and this applies to music-based ecotourism as a form of sound-mediated environmentalism. Basically, now for copyright issues, I cannot show a clip of the case study that I explored through my work so far. You can find the examples cited in my dissertation and in my forthcoming book, but just to summarize, we're talking about music videos that people have the power to bring people in a place that for various reasons cannot be visited. In a case study that I explored, there was a series of music videos published during COVID-19, during the pandemic, a time in which movement in Italy was very restricted. People could not go outside of their houses, and I imagine that was the case in most of the world, really. Obviously, natural parks and protected areas could not be visited either. Therefore, there was this conjunct effort from a cultural organization and the management of a natural area situated in the south of Tuscany that published a series of 7 music videos set in this natural area, in which performers were playing some Baroque music pieces in various locations in this protected area. And interestingly enough, several people commented these videos, highlighting how these videos made them feel like they could escape the restrictions of the various lockdowns in the pandemic. They could escape the prison of their house, represented by their houses, by the boundary of their houses, and they could travel with their imagination, even for a brief period of time, to a green space, to a protected area, and be in touch with nature. And this is a very striking example of the potential of music-based ecotourism, albeit virtual. There is a lot of potential to explore in this direction, and conservation organization and park managements should really employ music and sound more, because it represents a powerful tool to make people engage emotionally with specific areas and their issues, their criticalities, but also the beauty of specific places and the beauty of natural spaces outside of their everyday life. And this can contribute to the sustaining of local communities that contribute with their activities to the work of constituting a protected areas. Often these protected areas include rural communities, there are villages, small towns, farmlands, and so on, and they all can benefit from sustainable forms of music-based ecotourism activities. The third cluster of sound-mediated forms of environmentalism include all those sound and music-based activities, events and festivals and performances that are aimed at raising environmental awareness in the public. Now, what is environmental awareness? Environmental awareness includes awareness of environmental issues such as habitat degradation, pollution, climate change, and so on. And also environmental awareness includes awareness of humans' impact on the environment. So extractivism, as in the example that we saw earlier, environmental awareness in that sense is being aware that humans are the cause of marble extraction in that area, and being aware of the consequences of marble extraction in the area. So these all constitutes environmental awareness. Now, why environmental awareness is important? That's because the higher the environmental awareness of an individual or a community, higher the chances for these people to engage with pro-environmental behaviors. We're talking about behaviors such as recycling, reusing, upcycling, and so on. Environmentally conscious approaches to shopping and consumption, more environmentally conscious approach to food, diet that following a diet that has a reduced impact on the environment, and so on. So all these behaviors constitute a body of pro-environmental behaviors. So how can music and sound raise environmental awareness? I grouped all these sound and music-based activities into the label of environmentalist musicking, which include also listening to sound. These cases of environmentalist musicking are again situated on a continuum, similar to the continuum that I explained earlier. But in this case, this continuum goes from the implicit to the explicit. Some cases of environmentalist musicking raise environmental awareness explicitly by explicitly telling people what to do. And other cases of environmentalist musicking raise environmental awareness more implicitly, similarly to the case studies related to musical ecotourism. Music raises environmental awareness implicitly by bringing people together, perhaps, in a context, in a situation, in a place in which specific issues are discussed, faced, explored, and in situation in which there is an opportunity to learn about specific issues or to engage with specific issues directly through a non-verbal way, perhaps. I'm gonna show some examples of that. So along this continuum towards the implicit, and we have in events and festivals that do not speak directly about an environmentalism, but rather create spaces to frame the discourse around it, as I just said, by bringing people together, perhaps in a context in which specific issues can be discussed. In the middle of the continuum, we have cases where musicking prompts audience into reflecting about ecology and sustainability by giving ideas that can be discussed further. And on the explicit end of the continuum, we have musical performances that directly aims to educate about environmental issues and pro-environmental behaviors. And I'm gonna show a couple of examples of what I mean. The first case study is an example of a duo that uses music to educate about ecology, but also about other social issues. They are quite engaged with specific pedagogical approaches to using arts to educate kids. So they organize performances in schools or in other spaces, involving kids in participatory musical acts that make them embody essential informations about how to interact with each other and with the world. In the example that you see in the picture, they're using some empty plastic bottle that have been emptied, and cans, aluminium cans that again have been emptied, and both bottles and cans have been subsequently filled with gravel and small rocks and stones, and then sealed in order to make some sort of homemade percussion instruments and shakers and so on. And the kids had the instruction to accompany the performance with these improvised percussion instruments. And after the performance, they were instructed to dispose of their homemade instrument according to the material. So educating about recycling and proper waste disposal, but through a musical mean, and embodying the information regarding the specific pro-environmental behavior, which is recycling in this specific case. On a similar note, this is a picture of the Gauda's junk band. It's a very peculiar band that performs with upcycled instruments. All the instruments you see here are made out of something else that was not intended as an instrument in the first place. They build everything themselves, collecting their materials from a local recycling center. You see on the left hand of the picture a percussive instrument made out of orange pipes, plastic pipes, which is being played with some flip-flops, worn off flip-flops. A drum set is made out with some soap barrels, plastic barrels. The slide guitar on the right hand side of the picture is an ironing board. Guitars are made with wine boxes and pasta strainers. Well, we're still talking about Italy, so kind of appropriate to the usual stereotype, I suppose. But anyways, these people go around and collect materials and build up instruments that are obviously very hard to play and have to kind of relearn their approach to music. Just to show the audience that these instruments, that materials can be reused, there is a second life to things, and things can be upcycled in order to make something else. But they do all of this without lecturing the audience at all. Therefore, their environmental awareness raising process is 100% implicit, because they do not speak explicitly about their actions. And they just show the results of what they do, and bring them around, and they use music to make people connect and visualize and listen to some practical results of a specific pro-environmental behavior. The last brief example of this cluster, namely sound-mediated environmentalisms aimed at raising environmental awareness, is a picture of the main area of a massive festival that is organized yearly by a national environmentalist organization. The organization is called Festambiente. It's quite a big festival that brings together many smaller organizations that operate in the sector, no-profit and charities and so on, other companies that operate around the themes of sustainability and environmentalism in the country. The festival itself includes several performances, but also many other events, such as films and documentary screenings, readings, speeches, and so on. There is quite an impressive lineup of national artists, although interestingly, the role of music here is completely implicit, because none of these artists speaks implicitly about pro-environmental behaviors and environmentalism, but rather the role of music here is to create a festive environment where the theme of sustainability are discussed from several point of views. But music itself does not deliver the environmentalist meaning and the ideas around sustainability and so on. There are some issues related to this sort of festivals, not specifically about this one, but festivals with similar size. Firstly, we're talking about a massive number of participants, audience and public traveling to an area to attend to the festival that lasts over a few days. So we're talking about quite a large number of cars. Therefore, there is an environmental impact derived from the scale of environmentalist festivals that has to be factored in the environmentalist discourse. It's always a matter of finding a balance between the outcome of an event, of any of the events that we discussed in this lecture, any form of sound-mediated environmentalism, the positive and the negative impact that these sort of events have. So it's really important to carry out a sort of assessment of what are the implications of organizing such a festival, such an event, because if I'm organizing an event in a protected area, but I'm asking 2,000 people to drive there, maybe it's not the most effective way to make people engage with ideas and meanings around nature and environmentalism. So it's always important to think things through and be aware of all the possible implications and consequences that often lie behind any musical performance, sound walk, festival, concert, sound or music-based event and activities, and so on. We're approaching now the fourth and last clusters of sound-mediated forms of environmentalism, which includes all those sound and music-based activities and performances that are aimed at questioning, making the public, the audience, question their very own ideas about the relationship between human and nature. We're not talking about every musical performance, any musical performance, but music and sound based events that are shaped in a very particular way, often some sort of sound rituals, such as a sound meditation, a sound bath, a listening meditation perhaps, but also some unusually shaped performances that are crafted in a particular way to make intentionally the audience reflect on their own relationship with nature and their own ideas about nature and ideas about reality itself. So we start with the assumption that any musical performance enables a liminal space in which societal norms and values are questioned. In this case, the norms that are questioned are those surrounding the relationship between humans and nature. The audience, the participants to this sound meditation and baths, listening meditations and so on, are provided through the performance with models of reality and models for reality. Models of reality are models of human-nature relationship that have to be intended literally. So we're talking about, for example, a performance that is shaped in a certain way in which the boundaries between subject and object are intentionally blurred. These performances also provide the participants and the audience with models for reality, which include the tools and frameworks to access and interpret the model of the relationship with nature. For example, providing specific instructions for reflection to the participants, such as instruction on how to listen to sounds in a specific way that highlights the relationship with nature, or how to listen in a specific way that highlights the absence of boundaries between what is natural and what is artificial, and so on. I'm going to show an example now. This is an example of a sound meditation in which I participated. The participants were made walk for about half an hour in a protected area with an ornithologist who made them listen to bird songs. and told them about the names of the birds and so on. Participants were asked to stay silent and focus on listening. So a sound walk belonging to the first cluster of sound-mediated environmentalisms, basically. But at some point during the sound walk, they will start hearing sounds made by humans, specifically the sound of my guitar and the sound of some percussions and bowls played by the other facilitator in this specific event. Participants were asked to sit down and maintain their mindful listening practice, whilst they were provided with specific instruction on how to listen and how to relate to the world surrounding. The idea of this event specifically was to show that the boundaries between human sound and non-human sounds are completely made up. There is no factual boundary between the two, and the only boundaries are only conceptual, really. But in fact, they both music and the bird songs constitutes forms of animals' sound communication. So the participants were made reflect on this conceptual divide between so-called natural sounds and so-called artificial sounds, to eventually realize that there is no such thing as artificial or natural, but they both belong to the same sphere of phenomena. The next example, it's part of a theatrical performance in a forest, in which participants were made walk for hours along a trail with a hiking guide. Actually, it was a very particular performance in which actors could pop out of a bush, climb down from a tree and sing, make noise, play some instruments, interact with the environment, interact with each other and with the public, therefore questioning what was part of the landscape, what was part of the performance, what constituted the stage and what not, what was planned as part of the performance and what not, what was music and what was sound, again, what was intentional, what was improvised. So it's just a metaphorical way to make participants reflect on the fact that several of the boundaries and the dualisms that we engage with on a daily basis are 100% culturally constructed, culturally and socially constructed, with the ultimate aim to realize that in reality there is no such thing as a boundary between humans and nature. The concept of nature is made up. We often refer to nature as either the non-human world, everything that is outside us, or nature as in the essential characteristic of an individual, but in fact everything constitutes nature, and our actions are part of nature. We are animals and we have the same needs of any other animals, to seek for food, find a shelter, breathe air and drink water, stay warm and protect our offspring and so on. We have the same will to live and thrive as any other form of life. We are not so different from any other of them, really. And therefore there are no boundaries between humans, culture and nature. And if we see any boundary, that's because our fundamental misunderstanding of reality. And this is a very common mistake in our society. It derives from several philosophical traditions, and this is not the place to discuss them. I might do another lecture in the future. But it's important to think that listening attentively in a place can also result in this perceived sense of blurring of the boundaries between us and the environment that surrounds us. And this is a biological fact. We are nature. Music is also nature. And our ideas about nature and music also are part of nature. And we are interrelated with the world. We need air to breathe, so we need the plants, and so on. We need the plants to grow fruits that we can eat, the vegetables. We need other animal species to feed on them, and if you eat meat, of course. And we are interrelated with the rest of the world. And our actions inevitably cause consequences in the rest of the ecosystems. And our thoughts and ideas about nature are also part of the systems, are also part of nature, are also part of our evolutionary mechanisms that made us Homo sapiens, human beings. And our actions, thoughts, ideas affect the environment, because they are part of the very same interrelated system that constitute the ecosystem on planet Earth. As we approach the end of this lecture, what can we do towards the environmental crisis? So acknowledging this interdependence, interconnection, acknowledging the fact that we are part of nature and we affect the rest of nature with our actions, thoughts, and so on, we can choose to be a positive link in the chain. We can choose to be a positive interconnection with the rest of the planet. In this case, through the analysis of sound-mediated environmentalism, this happened through music and sound, and through making and listening to music and making sounds and listening to sounds and engaging with them and engaging with the context that surrounds music making and sound producing. So this is sound-mediated environmentalism impacting positively the interconnected system that constitutes life on this planet. Through music, through sound, but also through our ideas concerning music and sound, and therefore through the study of music and sound, such as, for instance, ecomusicology, eco-ethnomusicology, and ecocentric approaches to making epistemological claims concerning music and sound. So I've been talking about sound-mediated environmentalisms, again, all those social, political, and ethical acts that through music and sound foster ecocentric worldviews in the audience, but also in the people involved in the music making and in the creation of the events and so on. All these sound-mediated environmentalisms, these music and sound-based activities, obviously can only exist within the ecosystem of this planet. They can only exist on planet Earth. And they are interdependent with all the other elements present within the ecosystem as well. Just think of the fact that musicians, performers, a sound walking guide, or any member of the staff of the festival events and activities that I listed in this lecture, all these people, they need to breathe. So they need plants that produce oxygen and consume carbon compounds from the atmosphere in order to produce oxygen. So music and sound-mediated environmentalisms cannot exist without plants, for instance. All these people, again, they need drink water, so they need a fresh body of water to drink. They need every link in the chain of the water cycle. They need the presence of other animals if they want to feed on their meat, for instance, but they also need insects because pollination is key to the life of all the actors involved in these events and performances. So all these performances are enabled by the ecosystem of the planet. Also, musical instruments are made of materials, and these materials have to be extracted, outsourced, plants have to be cut down, and musical instruments have to be built. So, and instrument builders have the same needs of any other human being. So they need, again, air to breathe, water to drink, and food to eat, and shelters, and so on. All these phenomena are deeply interconnected. They are interdependent on other things such as weather, the atmosphere, but also the institutions and the governments and in international relationships, commerce and economy, and so on. All these things enable or afford sound-mediated forms of environmentalisms. And obviously, all these forms of sound-mediated environmentalisms impact the ecosystem in return. For example, as I said earlier, musical performances have an environmental footprint. But also, these forms of sound-mediated environmentalisms contribute towards the environmental discourse in a very practical way, because they bring people in nature, they raise funds for environmental and conservation organizations, educate about pro-environmental behaviors, raise an environmental awareness, shape relationships with nature, and create contexts in which it is possible to convey ideas about ecology and questions our very understanding of reality and what constitutes nature, and so on. So these contexts, these contributions that sound-mediated forms of environmentalism have within society obviously can only exist within the ecosystem. So, because the audience, again, needs to breathe, drink, eat food, the space in which the performances are organized can only exist on this planet, right? So, these contexts for the discussion and co-creation of ecological meaning and environmentalist meaning, ideas and values can only exist within the ecosystem, and in turn, they impact the ecosystem because they contribute in shaping people's ideas about ecology, and they contribute in shaping people's idea about what constitutes nature and how people relate to nature. Those who attend these performances and events and the festival may become more environmentally aware, adopt more sustainable ways of living, and see the world around them in a different way, with different eyes. In short, they may adopt a more ecocentric worldview, in which humans are not on top of the pyramid, and humans are not allowed to extract resources and predate on other species and other genders, and consume their bodies and own their bodies and so on. But humans instead are part of the ecosystem, are a link of a chain in the interconnected systems of living beings that inhabit this planet. Sound-mediated environmentalism can affect positively the environment through the creation of this context in which ideas and worldviews are presented, discussed, people engage with these ideas, and perhaps they take some of these ideas with them at home and they try to apply them in their daily life. One of the people that I interviewed after the sound meditation, of which I showed an example earlier, told me that after a few days he started listening intentionally to bird songs outside of their place. And he thanked me because they never thought that I could just go out there and listen to the birds. Which means, as I read it, it means that they never thought of the fact that they could listen to the voice of other living beings, acknowledging their presence, thus acknowledging the life and existence of other form of lives with their own agency and their own wish to live and thrive and be happy, basically, and escape suffering and so on. If our actions are part of the ecosystem and influence the ecosystem on return, also our ideas about things have a similar effect. And the study of environmentalist musicking itself is enabled by the ecosystem, again, because scholars have to breathe, drink, eat, exist within the ecosystem. They employ resources, they consume resources, and so on. But the study of environmentalism and music also impacts the environment through the implication of this research. For example, if any of you today, after this lecture, will see music, sound, and the study of music and sound in a different way, as part of an interconnected system that exists on this planet. And if any of you acknowledge this and recognizes the potential role that music and sound, namely sound-mediated forms of environmentalism, can have in counteracting the environmental crisis and all crises, this is a enormously positive impact that will ultimately be reflected in the ecosystem. So I want to leave you here with this thought about the power of sound-mediated environmentalism as a tool to inform. And I want to leave you here with these thoughts about the importance of acknowledging the interconnection between our actions and the rest of the world, and the interconnection between music, making music, listening to music, and listening and engaging with other sounds, and the rest of the world, and the interconnection between thinking about music and researching about music and the rest of the environment. Hoping that this will make you reflect about your own music and artistic practices, but also make you reflect about your own research stance about musicking and making ethnomusicology and music studies research. And finally, I hope this will make you reflect about how music and sound can constitute a tool useful to face the cultural component of the environmental crisis, and how music and sound can be a tool to create a more ecocentric and just society. So this is the end of this lecture. I would like to thank you for listening so far about this topic, which is something that I deeply care about. Once again, you see on the screen my email address. You are more than welcome to reach out with any question, concern, feedback, or anything really. Thank you very much again.